Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. and today I'm reviewing Cat Blues from Bitewing Games. Cat Blues is a 1-to-4 player bidding and set collection games from Bitewing Games. This is a prototype, all rules and components subject to change, and I'll have a link to the crowdfunding campaign down below. In fact, this is a crowdfunding campaign for Cat Blues, for Bebop, and for Rocksteady. Not actually Rocksteady, but every single time I say Bebop, I want to follow it up with Rocksteady, because that's the only two words that go together in my head. But it's a campaign for Cat Blues, for Bebop, and for Shuffle and Swing, which is basically Rocksteady when you think about it. Shuffle and Swing, Rock, and... I'm getting too lost in this. Anyways, Cat Blues. Let's talk about Cat Blues over here. This is a 1-to-4 player auction, bidding, and set collection game. What you're trying to do is you're trying to gather sets of cards to trade those in for tips across 3 rounds of play. There is a single round mode that you could play just a single round. Frankly, it's less satisfying. It's not the way I'd recommend the game. It's shorter. It does have that upside, but it's not necessarily as much fun strategically to pace yourself across the 3 rounds. In the 3 rounds, what you're trying to do is round 1, we're starting off with round 1, you're going to select a bunch of tips, you're going to grab one color of tips, the color doesn't matter, you have 3 different pools over here, these are the tips that will define the end of round 1. When the tips run out, then the round ends, or when the cards run out, the round ends. I've never had the cards run out, not yet, but I'm assuming it is doable, but I mean it's inherently doable, but it's unlikely to happen. Anyways, in the game, you're going to start by revealing cards from this over here until you have either a joker or 2 of the same number. So for example, we just ended there, we got 2 2s. This is now the pool of cards that you're trying to bid on. You're bidding on those cards with cards from your hand in order to add those cards to your hand. Just so we're on the same page again, you're bidding with cards from your hand so that you can add those cards to your hand. So you're giving up cards to get cards. That's what you're doing. You give up A to get B. Why do you want B? Well, ideally, you're trying to collect sets of 4 cards. Every time you create a quartet, you're going to trade those in for bids, as well as one of these special quartet tokens, which will matter in the game a lot. So for example, I take a look at those cards on the table, and I'm like, you know what? Don't tell anyone, but I have a 2. Therefore, I want those 2s because I'll only need one more 2 to get a quartet of 2s. Over here, I have 3 1s, though. Those 3 1s, I might try to hold on to those. So right now, as much as I want the 2, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bid 1 card. Now, we have 7s here. We'll talk about those later. Those are kind of technically a module. You don't necessarily have to play with them. I am playing with them over here. But I'm going to bid 1 card. Now, note, I didn't say I'm bidding a 4. I didn't say I'm bidding a 7. I'm bidding 1 card, which means right now the bid to beat is 2 cards. That's the bid to beat. Effectively in the game, you can bid a number of cards, or you can bid a number of the same card. And a number of the same card is better than a number of cards. In other words, if I bid 2 cards, which could be a 4 and a 7, for example. In fact, you know what? Screw that. I'm going to go ahead and go straight to 2 cards. I'm bidding 2 cards. That's my bid. Now, someone else can beat that by either bidding 3 cards, which could be any cards, or by bidding 2 of the same cards. So they can say, I'm bidding 2 2s, I'm bidding 2 3s, I'm bidding 2 4s. And if somebody does that, let's say I bid 2 4s. The next person can beat it with 2 5s. So you can always beat it with a higher number or more cards. More cards is better than fewer cards, and higher numbers are better than, well, lower numbers or no specific numbers at all. That's the sequence of bidding. So over here, I take a look at my hand. Now, obviously over here, I wouldn't know the other person's hand, so this is a little bit not exactly how the game would play out. But in fact, what we're going to do, I'm going to be, the guy bid 2 cards. That's annoying. I think I'm going to bid 2 4s. No, 2 3s. I'm going to bid 2 3s over here. I'm bidding 2 3s, okay? That's a higher bid. The reason I'm doing that is because, frankly, I actually started with 4 3s. I don't even need this 3, but as soon as I can get it, I can trade in a quartet. So I'm bidding 4 3s because you can only trade in quartets when you win the round. So I'm going to bid 2 3s using my joker as a 3. Now, there's a cost to using jokers. We'll talk about that. Let's see what this guy wants and why. This guy wants the 3. But past that, not specifically that much, and it's not really worth bidding all that much for everything else, so you know what? We'll tap out. So we're going to actually let this person get it. So this person's going to go ahead. It goes back to me. I can choose to outbid. I'm like, no, I want the 2s, but not if I have to give up a 2 to get it. So we're going to go ahead, and we'll let the bid of 2 3 stand. The 3 is going to go away into the discard pile, and this goes in front of you as a mark of shame. Well, not technically a mark of shame, but it does count as whoever plays the most jokers in a round will lose 5 points in the round, 5 tips. You don't get that many tips. That's a big consequence. So we play the joker in front of us. We have that. We do get these cards. They go into our hand. We can trade in our quartet of cards, so we're going to trade in our 4 3s over here. We got this over here, 4 3s, and then we go ahead and discard those. We're going to take 3 tips, because whenever you trade in a quartet, you get that number of tips. You trade in 4 7s, you get for 7 tips. You trade in 4 1s, you get 1 tip. You trade in 4 jokers, you get no tips. No tips. You can't call it anything else. Jokers have to be paired with something else. Jokers on their own, you can't call 4 jokers anything else. You just traded in 4 jokers. You got nothing. It's not nothing. You get a quartet token. That does matter. That's the only way to get this joker quartet is to trade in 4 jokers. But either way, I got that, but also I got a quartet token. Now over here, I get this token over here, this 3, because I traded in those 3s. Now the trick over there is those quartets aren't worth anything on their own, but whoever has the most quartet tokens at the end of the game, and you can only get each type once, which means I am less incentivized to trade in for 3s going forward. And so I'm trying to get as many quartet tokens as possible, because whoever gets the most of those gets the big tip, which is worth 10 points. And that 10 point matters. Those 10 points matter a lot. In a game that doesn't go that high, getting 10 extra points is a big thing to vie over. Anyways, last thing I do is if I have fewer than 4 cards, which in this case I don't, but if I have fewer than 4 cards, I get to draw cards from the deck until I have more than 4 cards. We reveal the next batch of cards over here from the deck. We got some more 2s over there. We got a 1, we have a 2, and boom, that's the next set being auctioned off. That is basically how you play through the game. Now, the round's going to end when the tips run out or when the deck runs out. Again, for me, I've always seen the tips run out first. Once the round ends, let's say, there's 3 tips left and you trade in 4 5s, you only get 3 tips. You don't get any excess, you just get what's left. It goes to your pool. That ends the round. You go ahead to get rid of the rest of the cards. Whoever has the most jokers loses 5 points that round. And then you go ahead and divvy up for the next round, rinsing and repeating. The reason you're playing across multiple rounds is you are trying to get all those quartets as much as possible, so that will matter while you go through the 3 sets of tips and then score it all up at the end. Now the 7s are a module like I mentioned already, but the only real module rule around them is there's no quartet token for them, but on the flip side is it's worth 7 points. So that's a big deal you want to be vying for, so that's the only real change that the 7s make in the game. Which brings us to a review, starting off with ease of play. The game is, for the most part, pretty easy overall as far as the actual rules. I find it's not the most intuitive. This is the very nature of bidding cards from your hand to put cards into your hand that you're then giving up cards from your hand. Like, assuming I'm playing it correctly, which I think I am, if I start with 4 3s in my hand, I can't even do anything with those. I have to first gain cards in my hand and then go ahead and trade it in for a quartet over there. So that whole aspect of bidding from usually in a game when you bid, you're bidding from your money to get something else. In most games that have a bidding mechanic, you bid from A to get B. In this game, you bid from A to get A, which is slightly more confusing. It works, it ultimately works, but I find that is one thing that's a little harder to get people up and running on. But past that, the game doesn't take too long. If you are playing 3 rounds, it's a little longer than you'd otherwise think, but you're going through the full 3-round sequence. So it is a little, we'll talk about that. We'll get into things in my review. Which I guess, speaking of which, let's start with what I like. Don't start with the things I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, starting off with what I like, which is lots of forcing people into bids that are, there's a lot of bid manipulation in the game. This game is all about trying to get the right cards for you. Even that first round where I was like, I can bid 1 card. It's like, no, you know what? I'm going to jump straight to 2 because otherwise someone else can bid 2. And players are always dealing with a hand of cards that they both want. Some of them don't care about others and are trying to navigate that line of getting to what you ultimately want in the game while holding on to things you want sometimes, while learning when to give things up, while also understanding how to chase the right quartets. Sometimes chasing 4 tips is not as good as chasing a quartet, because not only are you getting 10 points, you might be denying somebody else to get 10 points in the game. And so there's a lot more gameplay than you'd think for a very simple mechanic as far as when you think through what's in your hand, how do you get to the end goal, how do you get to that puzzle over there, how do you get the most quartets while also trading things in. The jokers are a fun little factor as well. You have to balance when and how to use those. Those can clog up behind if you're not careful. Knowing when to utilize them is a big part of the game as well. Knowing when to trade them in. Knowing when to bid on jokers in the middle. Since your hand is mostly comprised of cards you get from the middle, plus some randomly drawing from the deck, there's also some agency over when those jokers show up. And so the game teaches fairly quickly, it plays relatively quickly, and the big tips matter a lot, and the quartets matter a lot, forcing players to consider multiple things as they try to think through what are you trying to do? What are you trying to deny others? In this game, when you play through it, you'll be looking at other players' quartets, trying to deny them those quartets. I'll be looking at the board and be like, oh, I don't really know if I need those 3s. I already have a quartet. I do have some 3s in my hand, but wait, you want the 3s. And right now I have 1 more quartet token than you, and so I have to deny you the 3s, and it totally changes the game. This is a mean denial game. Not at first. It starts off about trying to get what you want in the game, and thinking through the consequences of your actions on yourself. But as the game progresses, it shifts towards thinking through how your actions impact others to deny them the things that will help them win, because ultimately, if they win, you didn't. So you're playing that game as you go, and I like that aspect of being mindful of what they're doing, being mindful of what they win, and learning how to force the bidding towards getting the end result that you want. I do find the 3rd round of play has the most screwage in it. The 3rd round is the most denial round. It's the last chance for anyone to get anything, and suddenly it shifts very heavily from you trying to help yourself towards you denying other people. Remember how I said that I've never run out of cards in this game? I've never run out of cards in this game, but consistently the 3rd round is the one that gets closest to it. Because the first 2 rounds you're focusing on trying to optimize what you get, and the third round you're also playing much more denial. So if I give up 4 cards to get 4 cards, sometimes that's worth it because it denied you making any progress, and if I think I'm in the lead, that's worth it already. So really the third round has a lot more screwage going on, and that's why I mentioned like 1 round, you could do 1 round. I find it's less satisfying because you're not getting that arc of gameplay where you're first starting trying to build your own empire, then the middle round's a little bit of both, and the third round is where it really gets tight as you sit there and try to figure out who's going to be the person who wins the game. As far as what I don't like in the game, there's only one real critique I have on it, but it is ultimately a thing that holds back the game experience for me. The game is very much a one-trick pony in terms of what it's doing. It's doing one thing and one thing only. You have a hand of cards, you trade in those hand of cards to get more cards, trade them in for quartets. It's fairly straightforward, and because you're playing across 3 rounds, which the tricky part here is, I both think playing across 3 rounds is the best way to play the game because you'll have the best experience out of the game, but I also think it means you're doing the same thing for longer than what I would otherwise normally do for a game of this type. This type of experience is normally the type of experience I would play for 1 round, but that's not where this game shines. This game shines in the 3-round arc because you get the most out of the gameplay, but then it's a longer experience than I want for a very straightforward game. There's a lot of games out there that have different ways of trying to like have something clever. You know, how do you have a game full of just cards? And there's so many answers to that puzzle. You just have a handful of cards, and this is the system at play. And this comes down to that auction aspect, that bidding, but then bidding to your hand and playing from your hand, which is an interesting twist. But I just don't know if it's an interesting twist that holds up across 3 rounds consistently, even though that's the best way to play it. So it's one of those weird situations in which the longer way to play is the best experience, but it's also a little too one-trick. It's hitting that same note too much too frequently for to hold up as well across 3 rounds. So it's both too long and not long enough, which is a weird complaint. But it is how I feel about the game ultimately. As far as I can see, others not liking. First of all, going for broke on jokers and other players it's satisfying when you're doing it, but it's very. What I mean by that, to be clear, is that when you're playing through the game, you want to have the least jokers. Or if you're having the most, once you're anyways getting dinged 5 points, may as well take advantage of them from today until tomorrow. Once you have the most jokers, get all the jokers. Go ahead. And that gives you an interesting incentive to try to just get everything, but it can be frustrating to other players when you see a player just completely sweep the round, because sure, they lost 5 points, but they weren't scared of the jokers at all, and they took all of them, and it's just, you have to play against that, but it can be frustrating seeing it happen. And then the flip side of that is being forced to having jokers in your hand is also frustrating. Sometimes in the game you draw from the deck, and if you're not trying to have the most jokers, if you're actively trying to avoid that, sometimes you have a handful of jokers that you just have to deal with them, so what do you end up doing with those cards? And that can be a frustrating thing to balance in the game. As far as final thoughts on Cat Blues, I overall enjoy the puzzle of what Cat Blues is doing. It is a fun game that my biggest complaint against it is that while it gives me a fun thing to look forward as far as the decision points in terms of how to get the right cards, to trade them in, and balancing the short-term value of tips and the long-term value of the big tip or whatnot, that gives you a lot of things to do, but again, the arc of the game is the biggest thing I struggle with, where I think that I enjoy the game, but I think it's too long for what it is, but if you make it shorter, it's then less satisfying. So it's almost like you have this weird scale of satisfaction and length, which is the game is, and it's like, oh, if you put a dot here, that makes it more satisfying, it also makes it longer, which means you have to make it more satisfying. That's my biggest complaint against it. It's the shorter version, I don't like enough. The longer version, I like more, but it's a little too long for what it is. Ultimately, for me, this is a 3.5 out of 5. There's definitely decision-making to like here. There's definitely things to consider and balance. I enjoy the game. I do feel it runs a little long for the one thing that it does across that whole experience. As far as other game recommendations, first of all, if you want some similar bid mechanic and a different experience that is equally chaotic and a little more, I guess, gateway, Liar's Dice is going to be a fun game that has you going with the same bidding arc, but with a whole lot more dice going on around the table and bluffing based on your own dice as well as based on what the dice that other players have as well. And if you're looking for a game that has a similar mechanic, not really similar mechanic, but another game that has a very interesting bid mechanism that has a very fascinating game that's held up for me for a very long time, I highly recommend checking out For Sale. You're basically going through 2 phases where you start by buying properties and then in round 2 you turn around and sell those properties. Very fascinating mechanic as far as the way that game executes. In any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.